David Rosenberg. David Rosenberg, of course, is chief economist and strategist at Rosenberg Research and Associates, and we're grateful, as always, for his time. David, good morning, and thank you for joining us. Our viewers who are familiar with you and your work will not be surprised that you are a skeptic when it comes to the idea of the prediction that some have of a brisk V-shaped recovery in Canada or in the U.S. How do you interpret his statement that Mr. Macklem, Governor Macklem, is expecting a prolonged bumpy recovery with setbacks along the way?
Well, I think that's basically exactly my view. Look, I think that the global economy, not just Canada and the U.S., just went through a detonation in the second quarter. You could be seeing negative GDP of 40 to 50% at an annual rate. I don't think we even had numbers that bad in the 1930s. So there's no doubt as the economies reopen, it's going to be a bit of a dead cat bounce in the third quarter. We're going to get some positive growth. It could be even plus 15 or 20%, but in the context of like minus 40, minus 50, the key is really going to be the fourth quarter and beyond. What sort of follow through are we going to have? And I'd say that, the uncertainty is extremely elevated right now. But I think if you're taking a look at the history of pandemics, as far as the impact they have on the economy and on the markets, it's like an earthquake, and then you have aftershocks. So I think that's what we're going to be left with for a long period of time, even past the worst eye of the storm, which is what we have been in, which is going to be a prolonged period of very choppy and subdued economic growth.
How dependent are your views, if at all, on the development, the successful development of a vaccine?
The vaccine is a complete game changer. I would be the first to turn extremely bullish if we got a vaccine. So there's no question about that. I'd say short of that, even some sort of effective treatment, would be a help. A vaccine is a game changer. I still think that, in the future, we're going to have to, pay down a lot of this debt. Someone's going to have to pay for it. A period of uncertainty as it relates to how the Bank of Canada is going to manage through its pregnant balance sheet. There's going to be lingering issues that are going to curtail growth even if we get a vaccine. But a vaccine is a real game changer in terms of getting things back towards quasi-normal earlier than otherwise would be the case.
One of the most recent data points we received on the Canadian economy came late last week when we received retail sales. You've addressed those retail sales figures in your note of today. Tell us what you think of those retail sales.
Well, they fell off a cliff. Of course, the data are lagged, and Stats Canada told us to expect at least a partial rebound, when the May data come out. But we also got wholesale trade, which, by the way, doesn't get as much attention, but is actually bigger impact on GDP than retail is. And the decline was at least as big on the retail side. So all the numbers are telling us that the second quarter is going to be just absolutely horrible. The key is going to be really, because these are real backward-looking data, the key is going to be not just even what sort of uptick are we going to get in growth in the third quarter. That's a given. Everything is going to be what follow-through do we have into the fourth quarter and beyond. I think a lot of it will have to do with the success of the reopenings and how that's going to translate into hopefully continued decline in the number of cases that we have. I'm not expecting a vaccine till next year at the earliest, so that's going to hold back the recovery. But the question is really going to be not so much the second quarter anymore. The markets are priced it in. We all know it's going to be a disaster. So the key is going to be, because we're going to get some good news on May retail sales. The question is going to be, into June, July, August, September. What are the numbers really going to look like? And then what follow-through do we get into the fourth quarter and early next year?
There was some news on the so-called price deflator in those retail sales numbers on Friday as well. You've addressed that in your report as well. How real is the risk of deflation in the Canadian economy right now?
Well, I think that we're actually in a period of deflation. I know there's a big debate amongst the economists about, the veracity of the CPI data, because when you're locked down and not buying anything, a company can charge whatever it wants, but nobody's buying. But the reality is that most parts of the country, outside of, say, Ontario and or Toronto and Quebec, have reopened. And we got the latest CPI data, and they were extremely weak. And if you're taking a look at any supply-demand framework right now, of course, this is a shock both to demand and supply. But the near term, and I'm talking about for the next couple of years, we're going to be left with what economists call a huge output gap, a deflationary output gap, that's going to take years to resolve. So when you're taking a look at industry operating rates, or you're taking a look at where the unemployment rate is, it's going to take a long time to get this economy back in equilibrium. It's going to take like a series of V-shaped recoveries in demand to get there. I just don't see that happening. So the deflationary pressure is going to remain acute. It's going to be a big challenge for the Bank of Canada when you think about what that could mean for wages and, of course, what that's going to mean for corporate profits. And then you trace that through into spending in the economy. It's going to be a very big challenge here. But the answer is, yeah, we are in a deflationary environment, and the supply-demand framework I'm working with is telling me that's going to be with us for an extended period of time.
And lastly, a lot of people generally, and perhaps a lot of investors, are drawing optimism from the advancement of economies around North America and elsewhere in the world into different stages of reopening. You've taken a look at some of the data in Canada, things like airport activity, traffic activity. How much reopening has actually taken place in the Canadian economy?
Well, look, fairly sizable, in the smaller provinces. I mean, the reality is that you haven't seen anything really yet significant when you don't include Toronto in there. You don't have Quebec, where their numbers have been actually, horrible, for lack of a more sophisticated term. But if you take a look at the national aggregates, whether you're looking at the states or you're looking at in Canada, and notwithstanding the fact that you've had some of the reopenings hit a snag in places like Florida and Texas and Arizona and now California. But the high-frequency data tracking are improving. There's no doubt about it. The most ardent bear would tell you that things are improving on a sequential basis. But the way I'm looking at it is that, you're down GDP 40 to 50% in a given quarter. How is it not possible to get some sort of bounce the following quarter? It's just a natural occurrence, and of course we are reopening. I just think that a lot of the market anticipation and the enthusiasm around the V-shaped recovery, I think it's overdone. I think we are going to get a decent bounce in the third quarter. It will not recoup anywhere close to the deep loss we had in the second quarter. And then the big question I keep on saying, and this is where the uncertainty comes in, is what happens past the third quarter dead cat bounce. And I think, as you said, without the vaccine, I think that you're going to have an elevated level of consumer and business caution. That means they're going to be conserving cash in their balance sheet. Savings rates are going to be going up. It's not the end of the world, but when savings rates go up and you're not generating much income in the economy, it comes at the expense of something called aggregate demand, which is GDP. And that's why I think the odds of a growth relapse in the fourth quarter are actually very high.
David Rosenberg, thank you as always for your insight. David Rosenberg is chief economist and strategist at Rosenberg Research and Associates. We thank him for his time.